What is up, my Little Deinos? Vepsis, your host of the Helsinki Hydreigons, and we are here. How did I do my intro again? Oh yeah. What is up, my Little Deinos? Vepsis, your host of the Helsinki Hydreigons, and we are finally back after quite a bit of a break from my end from YouTube. But we are here for a Champions of Galar Tournament Season 1. I have to stop for a second, as you noticed, to remember the actual league team name that we are gonna be joining into. And we were invited by a good friend of ours, Aquarius, who will be one of the hosts of this league in itself. She will be hosting this alongside with Dr. Slacking and Jack / Gray, who all are familiar to us more or less from draft leagues from past generations. And this season will be very unique in a way that every single coach in this league has won a championship at least once throughout Generation 8 in Wi-Fi scenarios. So it's gonna be very high for you guys to be watching this season, but it's gonna be nerve-wracking for me, because every single week is gonna be hectic as all hell, stressful, really have to dig deep with your team building aspect and challenge yourself in a lot harder ways than maybe normally in a Wi-Fi scene. But it's gonna be exciting time for you guys, and we're gonna be doing this draft analysis a little bit differently. You already see in front of your screen my full roster, and I'm gonna be just digging down and give you my thoughts why I pick certain mons together. Not necessarily talk about what each mon will do, because we all know by now what, like, for example, what Nidoki does in a draft league format, or Scrafty or Seismic. I will just focus on how I view the synergy within the team, how maybe typing wise they make sense together, and what I was looking after to add into the team in itself. So we're gonna be taking a different approach, and we're gonna be starting focusing on at first about the offensive core that I drafted together, and that will be starting with the Zeraora, which was my round 1 pick. And here we are with my round 1 pick being the Zeraora. And before we talk into this, I'll just briefly mention how the drafting worked. Every single team were given 115 points, and they could spend it between 10 mons to 12 mon roster. So you can pick 10 mon roster, 11 mon or 12 mon roster, whatever the coach decide to do. And for my sake, I took the 10 mon route, because I value quality over quantity in itself. But now, back to the topic itself, why I picked Zeraora as my round 1 pick. I had 3 mons in mind as the draft went along, and I started to see what mons were taking. And there were 3 mons, including Zeraora, that I had my eyes on, that if they do fall into me, I will pick one of them for myself. And those 3 were Tornado Therian, Tapu Koko, and Zeraora. It just happened to be that the 2 picks right before me happened to be Tapu Koko and Tornado Therian. So the decision was made for me that I get to pick the Zeraora. And all these 3 have in common that they have that elite speed tier, and they are one of the best mons in draft league format. I was looking to add one of those, since my draft position going to this draft was the 11th pick out of 14 coaches. So my draft spot wasn't necessarily the luckiest one to be starting off with, but I'm kind of used to that the majority of the time going to these drafts. And I was so fortunate enough to get the Zeraora, which is a mon that you guys have seen me using throughout the Generation 8 with great success, and I'm very, very happy that it fell into me. The last time that I had it was in the UBL, and that time we did win the championship most recently to ourselves. So I'm happy to have it back, and now we're gonna be focusing on why I picked a Kurem alongside with Zeraora, that is gonna be a phenomenal offensive core that I've kind of done before, not necessarily with these two, but there was a Tapu Koko Kyurem core that I did in the past in the NPL tryouts. And then, like I said, the next pick that I was going to be talking about was my Kyurem. That ended up being the round 2 pick for myself, and there was a very specific reason why I wanted to pick Kyurem alongside with the electric type like Zeraora. Things like Zeraora or Tapu Koko respectively, they only have 2 typings necessary that they have to worry about checking from opposing side that can deal with them defensively, and those are usually fat grass types and fat ground types. Well, Kyurem pairs so well with either Tapu Koko or Zeraora. Like I said before, I did in the NPL tryouts in my channel that you have seen, like, I think it's 2 or 3 years ago by now. You're gonna be seeing a flashback through it when I drafted those 2 together. I had the same mindset, and I believe from that time to this day that is one of the more underrated offensive cores, at least what I think, that you can pick in Draft League Format. Regardless of the generation, regardless what is available, it always works really well together. And I wanted to do that with Zeraora as well. And this was actually a combination that I've used in Showdown in this generation. That was in a national decks. And it did work out pretty well for me back then. So I have a huge comfortable level to this. And I kind of like the fact that I'm picking Kyurem for myself, because this is the mod that throughout the generations has been one of the most annoying things for myself personally to face. Why? Because it keeps always freezing my ass. Whatever mod I throw out to try to check it, it's gonna be freezing with one of its ice moves like Ice Beam or Freeze Dry. So now I'm hoping that karma can be turned around, and now I instead get spoon fed like that, and I get to freeze my opponent every now and then. I don't bank on it necessarily to happen, because my luck can be shitty at times. But more importantly, it's here for the offensive synergy, and it's so strong. And I love the fact that it has now the freeze dry, so bulky water types will be basically a fodder to this thing, whereas in previous generations they would have tried to wall it in itself. But now, let's go and see that how I viewed Nidoki to be a great third partner of this offensive core that I have coming together. And then the third component of my offensive core will be Nidoki, like I mentioned. And Nidoki, I mostly was looking towards picking to have a strong breaker through steel types and fairy types that Kyurem would potentially be struggling with depending on the matchup. So I figured that just adding to the offensive synergy, I think Nidoki made most sense. And it's another mon in Draft League format that you usually always hate go to up against, because it's so hard to deal with Nidoki, because it hits everything so well with its coverage. The only thing that I can think of that can somewhat deal it well would be something like a Cresselia or a Yuxi or just a really fat normal type. But outside of that, there's no really good defensive counter to this Nidoki, and I mainly love to have that for myself, and I don't have to face it. And this just takes away one of the checks in Draft League metagame in Galarian decks to my own electric type like Zeraora that I would hate to go up against. So it makes kind of sense in both ways, that you don't want to face someone, and it makes sense for your own team that you have. And that's primarily what I was looking after getting a Nidoki. And the plus side of it is that I get the Ground and Poison type and a ground type in itself already in a one package, and I really love the offensive core that I was able to get together. Now after this, something that I was trying to get was Mienshao, but unfortunately one of our good rivals and friends in Draft League community, Shaku King, happened to snipe that for me in round 5 right before my pick. So I had to take a little bit of different approach. So who is gonna be the fourth pure offensive member of this team? And it's gonna be one of my later picks of this draft, and it's going to be Talonflame. I'm gonna be talking about that, and then we're gonna be moving towards some of my utility and defensive options of my roster to round out the team. And as the fourth component of my offensive core, and all the way down for my 8th round in this draft, I decided to pick the Talonflame for myself. This is not like a direct replacement for Mienshao for obvious reasons, but I do like how the Talonflame, I'm always meant to say Mienshao, I wish I could be saying Mienshao, but god damn it, Sakuki, why had to draft that right before me? But going back to the Talonflame, the main reason why I wanted to pick this thing was that it's an offensive mod on my roster to pair with my Zeraora, Kyurem, and Nidoki that is off the ground, because 2 of my other mons that are purely offensive are ground weak like Nidoki and Zeraora. So it's nice to have an offensive option to be able to gain the initiative from there if my opponent is forced to go for a ground type move or attack in itself. And it has the option to go for something like momentum move like U-turn. Because Talonflame does have quite a few things that can counter it in Draft League format, like bulky water types, bulky ground types, bulky rock types for example, or bulky electric types, anything in that nature. But those aren't necessary typings that I cannot already break with my other members of the team. When you think about bulky rock types or bulky electric types, Nidoki takes care of them. If you talk about a bulky ground type or bulky water type, Kyurem takes care of it. So you kind of see how the offensive synergy does come together regardless of the fact that Mienshao didn't come into the play. And Talonflame does offer some other measurements to that I do still deem valuable for this team. And for what it's worth, it is still a fairy and a fighting resist for my own Kyurem as well. So defensively wise, while it's not meant to be a defensive wall, its typing allows it to take the key hits for to kind of round out the offensive core that ways too. So I kind of like how they came together in itself. And now we're going to be focusing on how I view my utility most, like the shenanigans core of Togekiss and Jirachi coming together, and then we start falling down to the defensive core of the team and how it kind of rounds out this entire draft. And as my 4th round pick in this draft, and one of the Serene Grace core members that I end up having was obviously Togekiss, and it was my 4th round pick. And there was 2 ways of looking at this pick from my point of view, which was the short-term gain and the long-term gain. And starting with the short-term gain is that I can immediately address a couple of weaknesses that I'm gonna be having with my offensive core, which I kind of briefly already mentioned. The reason is why Talonflame made a lot of sense for my team, which was being weak to fighting, Dragon for Togekiss's sake that it can be able to cover, and then ground weakness. Zeraora, Nidoking obviously being the ground weak ones, and Kyurem in itself is weak to fighting, and Dragon in itself that Togekiss can cover. So there's basically the typing wise the short term gain that I was looking after when I made this pick in round 4 in this draft. The long term gain of making this pick was basically me looking that what are the potential fairy types that I'm gonna be drafting and which are still available for me to do wherever I'm gonna be decide to picking one instead if I'm not taking Togekiss. And basically what I was looking after for my fairy type for this season was to be able to resist fighting and dark reliably. So we cannot take a fairy type which is a pop psychic like Gardevoir or Hadrini to qualify for that, and we cannot take a fairy type like Grimmsnarl or Wendy, the weekly top unfortunately, or Diancie either, because none of those can be able to resist fighting in itself. And why is this important? Well, fighting is gonna be one of the typings that I had to worry about with having a Kyurem on my team, but most importantly as well, there are gonna be a lot of other strong fighting types, like for example Urshifu Single Strike, to be allowed for others to be picking, and obviously they're gonna be picked by other coaches. So of the chance I have to play them, I do want to have a fairy type that I can comfortably say that they can at least check them to an extent, depending on what move they're gonna be clicking us. I know for a fact how strong Urshifu Single Strike will be, so not necessarily a fairy type will mean always that you're 100% safe from it. But it's better to have something like this to deal with it instead of having the Diancie or Grimmsnarl or Wigglytuff in itself. So those are kind of the angles that I was looking at with the taking Togekiss, and I'm kind of excited to use it because I haven't actually had a chance to really use it both on Showdown or Wi-Fi scene. So it's gonna be a new experiment, and it's one of the most that I also hate to go up against for the obvious reasons, and I would think that's the same thing for most people as well. So it's just another mod on my roster that I can say, well, I'm glad that I have it to get to use it and I don't have to face it myself. And now we are gonna be talking about the Jirachi next and how that's gonna be fitting on the team. And as my round 6 pick ended up being the Jirachi, the main reasons why I was looking after picking this mod, besides the obvious factor of completing the Serene Grace core with Togekiss, was more so the fact that I wanted to have a very reliable steel type for resisting the ice type hits, considering the fact that my Seismic being my water type will not be able to resist that in itself. And I do have some other mons that are weak to ice, like my Nidoking, my Togekiss, and besides the fact of providing me a steel type that is very valuable typing to have in draft. It's one of the most important, if not the most important typing in Draft League metagame. It also provides me a one that can deal with fighting types in itself. Not necessarily to switching to them, but it's not at least weak to them in itself to their stab, and its psychic stab allows it to be able to beat them 1v1 in that scenario. And that's a big thing for something like Kyurem in itself, so I don't necessarily have a steel type that shares a weakness with it, and that's a huge added plus for me. And then obviously it can resist the psychic for Nidoking, and all those other factors that steel type can do typing wise, that it's able to resist for it. And for me, it's more so about the fact that this is a steel type that my own roster would hate go up against, because all three things like Togekiss, Nidoking and Kyurem, all of them would hate to face a Jirachi. Like, besides the obvious factors when you don't want to face a Jirachi necessarily in Draft League metagame because the Serene Craze, typing wise and the speed tier wise, a lot of my mons were actually weak to Jirachi. So it makes sense for me to have it instead of facing it also in that angle. So there are a lot of reasonings why I deemed that Jirachi being a valuable asset to me. Sure, it's gonna blow some of my points being a 70-point mon, which is like the third highest tier to be picking a mon from, but I deem it to be a valuable asset for my team, and it gives me a very strong foundation utility wise and offensive core wise when you think about it. Because yeah, sure, Kyurem, Togekiss and Jirachi, all three together will be pressured and kind of struggling at least once with a steel type in the matchup wise, what you can easily tell. But the thing with steel types in general, as we know, they don't have a reliable recovery with itself. Jirachi does have Wish, and Jirachi is one of the few that has some sort of way to gain its health outside of using rest as a reliable recovery. So because of that, Jirachi, Togekiss and Kyurem, with their respective coverage moves that they get access to hit those steel types, they will wear down that steel type that most coaches will only have one of them in their draft, and it's gonna be just a matter of time that one of them gets through it, and the other members have been helping to break through in itself. And I already have also Nidoking to deal with them offensively wise, so it's not necessarily a fact that I'm banking on the fact that I wear them down slowly. I have the measures of breaking through them immediately if I have to, and I do also have a Seismic coming along that can switch into them reliably. I also have a Talonflame to deal with them. I also will have a Scrafty that can deal with them as well. So I do have multiple ways to deal with steel types, so I don't deem it to be necessarily a biggest issue in the world if you think about like a fat steel type, like a Resisteel for example, being a huge nuisance for my three members, because I know I have ways to deal with that thing, switching into it or breaking through it throughout the time, or immediately break it with Nidoking. So in some ways it actually plays into my favor that I have so many ways to pressure one typing, because that typing usually doesn't have a reliable recovery to maintain and be able to keep up with that pressure that I put up to them. So in that sense, I do like the Jirachi fit on the team. And now we're gonna be starting to talk about more so the defensive pure backbone that I'm gonna be trying to add on this team. So most like Jirachi and Togekiss can be freed up from that role most of the weeks at least, and be able to do the other stuff that they are very good at because they are so versatile. So the next mod that we're gonna be talking about is Seismic, and then we break down the other members as well that I still have left to cover, which you already know, which I'm gonna be running out this draft in itself. And then starting to break down the defensive backbone of the team, one of the first members that I basically picked purely for that role was Seismic, which was from already for round 5, but the reasoning why I picked this one so early was that there is a personal comfortable level to this thing. Throughout this generation, the obvious water type that I've been picking a lot was Slowbro, but that thing was a mon that I couldn't even get after I picked Kyurem, because it was actually picked in round 2, I believe, called Doa. So off the chance I would have had any temptation of doing it yet again and be desperate and not see any other options for me, it wasn't even there for me anymore, and I'm quite okay with that, and try to see if I can fit any other new water type to try out. But the thing, the water types that I was considering to try, like Swampert, like Primarina, or Slowking even, just to be able to try the other Slow Bros or Slow Brothers in Draft League format, all of those were already taken at this point. So I was like, you know what? It's okay, I can make up for this. I can pick a water type like Seismic that was the bulky water type that I spammed the most before the Slowbro became a thing in my channel. So it's a mod that I know very well what it can do, what it cannot do, The primary weakness to it is that it doesn't have reliable recovery, but I can add up the wish passing through the Togekis and Shiratsi to it. I can still run rest on it if I really need to. It gives me reliable stealth rocker that I deemed valuable, so Nidoki nor Shiratsi has to do that role hopefully for me throughout the season, at least not too often, so I can do, I have the chance to use them in better ways instead of being the hazard setter in itself. And it also provides me a water immunity that can be useful versus a potential Dragavis matchup, or in general when I'm facing any other strong water type that I have to worry about when they're clicking their water stab. At least I can deter them clicking that as often they would be liking to do so. And it gives me that nice answer to steel types that my other members of my team like the Kurem, the Togekis and Shiratsi. Seismic not only resists their hits being part water type, but he also has the ground stab to hit them back. So in a lot of ways, Seismic just made a lot of sense for my team, defensively wise, typing wise, and considering the options that were available and the options that I just there weren't many other bulky water types, to be frank, in round 5 that I would have been as satisfied with having than Seismic in itself. So that's basically the reasonings behind this pick, and now we're gonna be breaking down, I believe, Scrafty next, why I deem that to be the valuable asset to add on this roster as this draft was progressing along. And then when it came down to this Scrafty being my 7th pick in this draft, right after Shiratsi and right before Talonflame that we already got to talk before in this video, this was around the time that I already had a pretty good or very solid idea that what kind of team I want to have and how many mons I will end up drafting, which was the 10 mons in itself. So the only 3 mons after picking Scrafty were left were the Talonflame after this, and then I have the Type Null and Appleton, the last 2 mons that we will be covering after Scrafty, how they fit on the big picture of this draft in itself. And now focusing on why Scrafty was the fit on this team. This was the backup choice if the Mienshao was taking. It's not necessarily equal replacement to what they provide, because obviously Mienshao is that fast, strong fighting type with access to momentum that I was really looking after, but unfortunately that wasn't going to be the case that I can get it. But I was okay settling with Scrafty because the other ingredients that it does add to this roster that I don't have to worry about necessarily getting after this down the road, and that's primary being part of Dark type, and it can be a mon that I can use either physically defensive or special defensive depending on the matchup and who we are going up against that week and how I'm trying to build up my team for that specific matchup. And this mon can be really good asset in that way because it can free up the roles from Togekis and Shiratsi, which I really was mostly concerned about, that I make sure that I have my other members on my roster can do those different defensive roles, so they are freed up to do that, because I don't want to spend necessarily 17 points or 14 points on Togekis and Shiratsi and then be forced to run them defensively all the time. Like, that's not how you want to spend your points and those mons on your roster throughout the season. You want to have fun with them, you want to be them able to flinch things down, you want to set up with them, you want to do all those other things with them instead of running defensive all the time. So Scrafty provides me that little bit of security in that regard, besides Seismic and the Type Null and Appletons that are coming along after this, that it provides that. Typing wise, Dark typing was really important to add, so it gives me that Ghost and Dark resist that I really wanted to have. And besides that, it's also somewhat or really good knockoff user when it's going to be coming into the matchups, which knockoff in itself, yeah, it's always been said one of the best moves in the game, and it might get old at some point and you may start questioning is there other moves that are better than it, but even this generation it's still one of the best moves in the game. So you want to have a mon that you know runs knockoff quite a lot in this its weeks when it's gonna be brought, and it's very valuable in a lot of different ways, because in a Wi-Fi scene we have very little time to figure out what our opponent's sets are, so be able to get rid of their items and tell what those items were is a big thing in itself. That gives you a lot of knowledge that what you expect it might be in front of you. But it's also a nice asset in a ways that I can get rid of those items and get rid of those heavy duty boots, those leftovers, those reducing berries, all those little items that my other members of my team might be worried about. Don't have to worry about them anymore if my Scrafty gets the opportunity to knock them off. And that's something that is not often mentioned about when you think about knockoff, why it's important, but I wanted to emphasize here right now, as you can tell, why I think it was important to have a Dark like this, that you do value it in itself, that it can come into most weeks to do that job for me in itself, besides being the defensive backbone that I might need in certain matchups. So that's gonna be the Scrafty, why I deem it to be valuable for this team. And now we're gonna be talking, I believe, Type Null next, and then we are gonna be talking Appleton as the final member of this roster, what I end up picking. And then as my second last pick of the draft that I was able to pick right after the Talonflame was going to be the good, reliable Type Null that you have seen throughout this channel and throughout this generation, that I've been using this mon, even actually in Generation 7 when I was part of the APA Academy, when it was like part Ubers League. Even there I end up at a free agency for Type Null, because this thing with Eviolite, like we know I've seen from me using, is so ridiculously bulky, and I wanted to have a bulky normal type, because besides having Scrafty, it's nice to have a ghost immunity, and to be honest, a very good special wall if needed to, on a physical or even a physical wall. Like normal typing is not necessarily something that you often deem as a physical defensive typing. Depending on, of course, if you're like a mill tank or something like that, then you might consider it as such. But usually normal types tend to be a special wall or offensive threat in itself. And for myself, for this team, Type Null just gives that another mon that can be a nice pivot with slow U-turn as initiative that I do think is available to have. And while I do have already momentum options in Zeraora, in Togekis, in Jirachi and Talonflame, all which can either wall switch, button pass or U-turn in itself, it's still nice to add one more option to that, and something that is optimally a little slower, so you get the slow initiative, so you let it to take the hit from whatever is in front of you, and then you get a nice free switching into your offensive threat and provide the pressure from there. That's mainly what Type Null tends to do for me, and it's been doing very good job for me, as you have seen from my channel. I do value it quite a bit, and it was good way to kind of round out the draft in itself, to be able to add something like this to the team, and I still had some points to spare. And it happened to be the case that Appleton ended up being a 4-pointer, which was the exact amount of points that I had left. And it worked out really well in that sense, because Appleton, which I'm gonna be now translating to talk about next, actually had a very necessary thing that I needed it to do, which is kind of weird to say about a pie. That why is pie so important to round up your draft? Do tell me, please. Well, we're gonna be talking about that next, so sit tight as we are gonna be rounding out this draft analysis. And as my last pick of the draft and the 10th pick that I decided to do was going to be that Appleton. And why was this thing the ultimate problem solver for my draft? Why is this simple pie that was sitting at 4 points that I could still afford and round on my draft so important to me? Well, let me tell you why. There were 2 typings that I needed to cover and provide a resistance to, which are almost impossible to do in one pick, except for the pie, which is to cover a ground resistance with your grass type that is not weak to fire. There is no grass type out there as far as I can, especially in a Galarian deck that can do that for you, unless you're picking the pie, the Appleton. The Appleton is going to be on the team because of that, because it provides me those 2 things, and considering the fact that I have quite a few things that are weak to ground like Zeraora, Jirachi and Nidoki. My fire resistance isn't too sturdy because I have a Talonflame and a Seismic as my resistance. And my dragon type being current before this didn't resist fire, being partly thanks to the fact that it's part ice type as well. Appleton actually kind of solved quite a few typings that I wasn't too comfortable with dealing with in that regard. So it was kind of funny how this kind of turned out, that this pie just sitting in 4 points and be like, yeah, I'm the ultimate problem solver for you, Vepsis. Pick the pie. You know you want it, and it's gonna be the ultimate problem solver. And it turned out, at least on paper, that that's the case. We have to wait and see how in practice it's gonna be working out, because the last time I had this was back in the UBL, like very early Gen 8 days, when I won one of the 2 championships. It was the first of the 2 that I won in this generation in UBL, and back then I did have the Appleton, but I never brought it in the game. So I hope that's gonna be different this time around, besides the fact that hopefully we win the title like that time in here in the Champions of Galar tournament, but hopefully we get to actually use this more, because I do think this thing has some utility in draft league format that is yet fully being discovered and be utilized as such. So I believe in Pi, and I hope that it's going to be the mod that I believe it can be as a problem solver for a few matchups that might be coming ahead of me. But that is going to be it for the draft in itself, and I kind of took a different approach this time around how I wanted to explain the picks. It might be a little bit longer than normally it was, but hopefully you enjoyed it to do it this way, and hopefully you are really excited for this season like I am. It's gonna be nerve-wracking as all hell for me, but it's gonna be very exciting for sure for you guys to watch. And make sure you're subscribed so you won't be missing out that action, because it's gonna be uploaded every single Saturday, and all of the coaches who are part of this league, all the 14 champions from the Generation 8 from Wi-Fi scene, all of them are linked down below in the description, so make sure to check all of them and their draft analysis, and as the season progresses, their battles as well, because I'm sure they're gonna be a lot of fun matches too for me to watch as a spectator when I watch others playing, but also me being part of it, and you guys can see it firsthand from my channel. So thank you yet again for watching. Thank you for your patience for waiting me all this time when I've been on my hiatus from YouTube scene, but I'm back and I'm excited, and hopefully we can bring another championship at home to the Helsinki Hydreigons until week 1 when we go up against Luxens. Thank you for watching yet again, and I'm gonna be see you guys.